All right, well, thanks a lot for having me, Rob. I really appreciate this. Always watch the guest lectures, but this is my first time actually doing one. So, as Rob said, my name is Matt Soucoup, and I am a senior cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. And I want to take a quick second to tell everybody what this role is, as it's kind of unique in the Xamarin ecosystem, is that I get to advocate for Xamarin developers at Microsoft, both in terms of providing Azure content to the developers, so I can create content like doing guest lectures like this, or creating libraries, doing videos on Channel 9, and also I have a seat at the table with the product teams. So if you find something that's not exactly working right in Azure, you can let me know and I can go back and say, hey, we can tweak this a little bit better in the mobile development space. So that's pretty unique, and it's a lot of fun. And if you do have any questions or whatnot, my Twitter is always open, direct messages are open, so feel free, or send me an email as well. So with that said, today we're going to talk about Azure Active Directory B2C. And let's jump right into a demo, straight off the bat. So let's bring this up. It's not going to be too long when you're doing an application until somebody actually says, you know what, let's make this thing available so users can create an account. And of course, when you want to create an account, you're going to have some pages like this one when you're not required to log in. And then you're going to have other pages that you're going to want to have secured. You're going to want to have the backend, so you need authentication. So then when you log in, you're going to want to have to be able to maybe use an email address and password, or use Twitter, use some social authentication. So you do that with the Twitter, it spins around, it goes out to Twitter, does the redirect there, and then you might want to have MFA, multi-factor authentication, because we really want to have it locked down. So we can send the code over. Then it comes through, you have to do this is all live, so I hope I typed it in right. The multi-factor authentication, and it finally comes back and we can see what Google says are the top songs in Madison. So we have all of that going on, logging in with Twitter or username and email address, multi-factor authentication, you're shelling out to a web view, you're doing OAuth, all of that stuff. And soon the simple requirement of, hey, let's add user accounts so we can protect some background information becomes a real rabbit hole of a bunch of different things. And so how do you do that? What's an easy way to do that? And that's where Azure AD B2C comes in. That's a lot of acronym right there for, and we'll talk about what it all is. So what is Azure AD B2C? Well, first off, what is Active Directory? That's quite simply, for the terms of this guest lecture, is a database of users. And so with traditional Active Directory, we know who the users are before they start using our apps. So like in a corporate setting, HR tells us who was hired, so we can assign them a username, we can assign them a password, and then they're able to log in to our app. However, what happens if we don't know who the users are? We have somebody who's sitting on an island enjoying life, and we know we're developing an app for them. We know we want somebody to use our app, but they don't know about our app. We don't really know who they are, but we want them to create an account. How can we do that? How can we facilitate creating accounts for these people? And that's where Azure Active Directory Business to Consumer comes in. It has all of the benefits of Active Directory, but the users can create their own accounts. We still have the Active Directory where we can have people, we can create the own accounts, so we can have employees still be created for us, but we can allow other people, we can allow the users, the consumers, so to speak, create their own accounts as well. So what we're going to talk about in this guest lecture are the fundamentals of AD B2C. There's a lot to AD B2C, and so what I want to do is try to give help with the terminology, how everything flows together, so we can kind of get the concepts down, the foundations of everything down, so we can talk about how to develop an app with it. So first off, what are some of the features that AD B2C provides us as developers? We get social authentication. So we're able to log in not only with the username password, the traditional or what I'll call local authentication, but we can provide authentication through Twitter. We can do it through Facebook, Google, Microsoft authentication, or even authentication such as Amazon. We get the multi-factor authentication. So we're able to send text messages to the user to say, hey, are you really trying to log in here, or did somebody steal your credentials? The ability to change passwords. So if a user did create an account, we have the ability to change their passwords, or they can edit their profile. So when they sign up for our account, we can also collect information about them, such as their hometown or their favorite display name. They can change that information as well. Because all this is done through web views, we're shelling out from our app to a web view, we can customize the look and feel of it as well. So it doesn't seem so unnatural when they're moving away from our app. We can keep the branding consistent. And going along with editing the profile from above, we can customize attributes to the Active Directory. So you can add something totally different, such as what your favorite song happens to be. So that's not to say that they're password reminders, but rather just completely different attributes. That's something that we want to know about the users. However, when we start to learn about Active Directory B2C, there are tons and tons of terms, and the learning curve really it's steep just on the dictionary level. I mean, there's policies, there's an application, there's a tenant, what's a claim, there's identity provider, there's scopes, there's more than just this. And everything gets thrown at you and things don't make sense right away. So what I want to do next is straighten this stuff out to help provide a foundation so we can learn about this and have it make sense just a little bit. So we're going to start off with a tenant. A tenant you can think of as the basement of a B2C. It's where everything else belongs to. Everything else we'll add to a B2C application belongs in a tenant. The first thing in there that we put in the tenant are called applications. Now, these applications aren't necessarily a mobile app or a web API that we're protecting. Rather, they're an abstraction that models those mobile apps or those web APIs. So they're an application within the tenant, but not necessarily our mobile app. And you can see by the rectangle and the little cloud that we can have a web API and a mobile app modeled within the same AD B2C application. So I told you the terms are a little bit confusing here, but in the demo, hopefully I'll straighten that out. And so there could be mobile app applications. There can be a mobile app web API application. There can just be a web API application or web app application, and so on. Next, at the tenant level, there are identity providers. This would be the Microsoft account or the Google or Facebook account. So each tenant application has access to all the identity providers that we create. So you only have to hook up the identity providers once to give access to all the tenant applications. Of course, there's the users. Now, these are the things that we're really after, the people signing up for our apps. And then finally, the policies. Now, I have these represented by little doors because they provide the gateways from our app to B2C, to the users. They're what's invoked by our apps, by our mobile applications, the real things, to interact with B2C. So let's take a look at that a little bit more. So the little phone drawing and the API are B2C apps. They're the real thing, but they're represented by B2C apps in B2C. The mobile app is going to invoke a policy in Azure Active Directory B2C. That policy can be a sign-in policy in this case. The user signs in and they do it successfully. They're returned a token. So now they use this token to request a resource from the web API. They say, hey, I want some data back. That web API, which is also modeled as a B2C application, then goes in and checks, hey, is this token that I just received good? Assuming that it is, it returns a response with all the data in it. So that's how each our mobile app and our web API, they're B2C applications, and they're B2C applications because they can now communicate with the B2C Active Directory and they get tokens back, so then they can communicate with each other. So a quick term review is that we have tenants. Tenants are like the overall basement where everything else belongs to. We have applications. Applications, again, modeling our real life app, our real life web API, but modeling it within the B2C tenant. Identity providers. This can either be a local email address, password, or things like Twitter or Facebook authentication. These are things that provide identity, who we are, make sure that we are who we say we are. Users. Obviously, these are the things that we're really after. You, me, the users of our app. And then finally, policies. How our app interacts with B2C as a whole. Policies such as signing in, signing up. There's other policies such as being able to change a password. And we can edit these policies to provide a more customized experience, which I'll show you in a demo coming up. And so the way that the flow of B2C works is that we say we have a mobile app. That mobile app invokes a policy. That policy then returns a token, and that token we use to access resources. So that's the quick 101 of the foundation of B2C. There's a lot more to it, but we're going to use this quick 101 here to understand everything as we start to develop an app. Now, there's two portions of developing apps within B2C. There is the web portal portion using the Azure portal, and then there's actually creating the app itself. So first off, we're going to talk about the portal in just a little bit here.
So Matt, we have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. Can we jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
All right, so let's knock these out. So quickly, can you briefly describe how B2C is different from the Azure AD B2B, the business to business?
Sure. So the business to business is mainly to obviously provide information between two businesses that are already set up. And whereas B2C is, so the business to business, you know the users already for each side. And you're providing information between the two businesses, allowing them to log in from each other. Where the B2C is the consumers. You don't necessarily know who the people logging in are until they create an account for you. And I could put more information in the show notes. I'll be providing a link at the end of this to explain that a little bit more.
Great. So we got two more. One more, when we're talking about social auth, can we change the display name for social auth? And will data move from Azure B2C to the social account?
So to answer that second one first, no. When we set up the social account, we can access resources or access permissions to it, but we won't automatically have that flow from our B2C up to the social account. Rather, we'd have to use a social accounts API. So yes, but B2C won't take care of that for us. We'd have to use like Twitter's API to move B2C's info up to there. So back to the first part of that question, can we change the display name in B2C to match what's in, let's say, Twitter? During the sign-in process, the user can type in what they want to have displayed in B2C. We're using the Microsoft Graph API. We can go in and change that by ourselves, or we can go into the Active Directory as an administrator and change it. But then again, the user might be wondering, when they come back logging into the app, hey, how did my display name change if we're showing it to them? So the answer is yes, but we want to be careful as a admin to not go through and change things out underneath their feet.
Right. All right. Another one. What about plugging in third-party authenticators? So Stephen's example here is Okta. I don't know I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, but other ones besides Twitter, GitHub, and things like that. So if you have your own third-party authentication, can you plug that in?
Sure. If there's right here, there's underneath the identity providers, as I'm showing right now, you can do add. And I was going to get into this in just a little bit, but we'll jump right into it. The ones that we have here are these. Microsoft, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Amazon, Weibo, QQ, WeChat, and GitHub. Those are the only ones by default that are there. I don't know offhand if you can provide any more other than what they have already. I can definitely go in and check that out to see if you wanted to do one that comes off my head initially. It's like GitHub, if you wanted to add GitHub social identity. So that's something I would definitely check out.
Okay, that's great. And then we got one more, which is, again, you might be getting into this, so if you are going to get into this in the future, just leave it to then. But how is the Azure B2C different from the ASP.NET Identity Framework and the OWYN context when you're talking about the API side? Does it hook into it? Is it different? That kind of thing. And if it's a long answer, or if you're going to get into it later, we'll just answer it later.
The short answer is that you could hook into it. So what you're going to have is that using I'm not necessarily going to show it, but one of my blog posts that I have linked to in the show notes shows how you can hook into it and actually use it. So essentially what you're going to do is just set up your principles and such to go out and say, hey, I'm going to authenticate or use the B2C as my authentication provider. So yes, it doesn't replace what you have set up. It goes along with it as far as ASP.NET stuff goes.
All right, great, thanks.
All right. So back to the portal then. So when you this is a tenant by default. So when you go through and you create a tenant, you get this set up. And you have several different portions here. And so this is everything that's tenant level. Applications, identity providers, your user attributes, and your policies. So quickly, again, at the identity provider level, is that we can go in and we can add several different identity providers, Microsoft account, LinkedIn, Amazon, the Weibo, GitHub is down there, preview, and so on. I will check in to see if we can add any third-party ones or ones that aren't there. I don't think so, but I will check that out to see if we can. But the ones that are there, like Twitter. So how you go through this is you actually have to go out to Twitter itself. So right here is apps.twitter.com. I created a new app. In this one case, I just call it Best Songs Ever. And in here, they give you a key and access token. And with that key and access token, you come back here to the client ID, you pop that in, and the secret, you put that in there. So once you have that set, then B2C takes care of all the communication between Twitter and itself. So you don't have to, as a developer, worry about that communication flow in between. Then the user attributes. By default, this is what you get. City, display name, email address, pretty much the basics. We can go in and we can add new ones. We can add like a favorite song, give it a data type, string, Boolean, or int, and a description if we wanted. So we can go through and add new ones that are customized to our app. And then we also can do users and groups. And here, this is the Active Directory itself. So here we can see I have 3 users. I'm going to go in and actually delete this one because I'm going to use it later. And if I go into the CodeMill Matt one, which is my Twitter account, I can see certain things such as the profile of it, my name, if I wanted to enter a first name and last name. This is what we were talking about before. Going in and as an administrator, I can go through and create things. If I could do it by hand, I could also use the Microsoft Graph API to go in here and do it through automatically as well. Automatically meaning through an API developmentally. All right. So, and then there's the policies. So again, the policies are how our apps actually interact with the B2C. So you have the sign up or sign in. We can edit profiles, reset passwords. And then there's also a sign up policy and a sign in policy. The guidance right now is to not use these two, rather use the sign up or sign in policy instead. So I already have one created. And I could go into here and I can see that I can actually go through and change different things. So I can go through and actually say, all right, for this particular sign up, sign in policy, I can say whether Twitter is enabled for it or not. I can say which attributes I want to collect when somebody actually signs up. So I can say, all right, I'm going to collect the city and I'm collecting display name. I could also say I want to collect the job title or state province. And if and I had any custom attributes, they would show up here as well. Application claims. Now this is interesting. Of the attributes that I've collected, or even the attributes that I have in my backing Active Directory store, these are the ones that I'm going to return to the app once the user's authenticated. So I don't necessarily have to return the display name. The app doesn't need to know about that once the user has signed in. It doesn't have to come back. One thing I do always want to have returned though is the user's object ID. That's like the primary key of the user in Active Directory. Other things I can change is like the multi-factor authentication. I can have whether that's on or off. I can change what the pages look like. So whether I can use a custom page for the sign up or sign in, if you're using Twitter, I can change what the page looks like for social accounts. If they get an error, what that page looks like. So I can customize the total experience with that as well. All right, so I'm just going to save my changes there. And then finally, I'm going to go back and talk about the applications. So again, as I mentioned, these applications model or abstract our real life applications in B2C. So I have one called Best Songs Ever. And in here I can specify, I'm actually going to turn the masking off for a second. I can specify when I create it, I'm going to get an application ID. We're going to use this later. And I can specify whether it's going to be modeling a web app / web API. And so here I'm going to say, yes, it is. And also whether it's going to be modeling a native client. And the important part here is that I get a custom redirect URI for this native client, which I'll be using in just a second. Another thing that we get is the scopes. So a scope is like a permission. And in this scenario, I'm not going to use it much more other than setting it up. But if I had more than one application, more than one B2C application, you can think of scopes as being permissioned for different B2C applications to speak with each other. So here I just have a read-only scope, and it's really nothing more than a formality in this scenario. But in future scenarios, if I had more than one application set up, it's how they would gain permission to each other. All right, so just going in, creating a new one, you name it, you get an application ID, you say what you want to have it modeling, and then the important things to note really are the custom redirect URI. Okay, so that in a nutshell is how we go through and we create the tenant and populate it. The thing that I'm going to protect here in the background is a Azure function. The function itself it's just hard-coded. Now if this comes up, it just returns a list of songs. Let me see, it's taking a little bit, so I'm going to make it just run in Postman. Postman is having a little time too. There we go. So what it does here is all right. There we go. I'll get the function URL, copy it. So what it is, it's just going to go through. It's an HTTP request, and it just makes a list of new song infos with the song name and artist name and returns that. So if I pop that into Postman here, it's a GET, and I send it out. You'll see I just get a JSON array back. So what I want to do is I want to make sure any people who try to access this are at least authenticated to my B2C. So by doing that, I go through in the platform features and hit this authentication and authorization. I want to make sure I turn it on. And then I always forget to do this is I want to make sure that log in with Azure Active Directory, because you can actually configure it without making sure that it's logged in. You can, because there is a allow anonymous there. So you want to have that in, go through and you configure it. So the first thing you have to do is the client ID. That client ID happens to be the same as the application ID that you just created. And then you have an issuer URL. The issuer URL happens to be the policy URL that you're going to be getting at. In other words, it is this thing right here. So you create the policy. So this is how the Azure function is going to talk back to the B2C app to make sure the token that it was passed is cool, that it's good. So I'm going to save my changes. Make sure they actually go through. Been saved. Open up Postman again. Send my request. And it should say I get a 401. Takes a little bit. You do not have permission to view this directory or page because I didn't send it along the bearer token saying that I'm good. All right. So the next step then is to actually create my app, to go through and call that web API to show the best songs ever. And along the way, you have to allow the logging in and so forth. So the way we do it is that it's actually, Microsoft has a NuGet package called Microsoft.identity.client, which does a lot of that for us. And actually, Rob, is there any questions along the way for the portal?
Just one. So we're talking about, when you're talking about scopes, the question is, what's the recommended method to have the Azure administrator authorize application scopes, short of them logging into the application and authorizing them? So is there a way, I think the question is there a way to delegate that the administrator can authorize scopes as opposed to just random developers? So Stephen, I think that's what you're getting at. If I'm wrong, let me know that.
I guess, yeah, the scopes that you're going to want to set up, you're setting them up at design time or actually application architecture time. So maybe I'm not following the question 100% there, but what you're going to do is at application architecture time, you're going to decide which scopes, which parts of which application that you want to have set up for other applications to access. And then when you do get that request coming in, you're going to be able to check on the incoming request which scope it has requested. And then based on that with your code, you're going to be able to say yes or no based on which incoming scope that it asks for.
So I think the question is, let's say you have a big company and you've got Azure administrators and you have developers. So you have lots of different applications going on in this big company. Is there a way that the Azure administrators can set restrictions on which scopes developers are allowed to create for their functions and for their apps so that they're not leaking inappropriate scopes?
I see. So within the portal itself, we're talking about, so not any developer can just go in and say, I'm going to create a bunch of different scopes within my application here.
Right. So let's say you're the administrator for the entire company and I'm just a developer and I have access to the portal and I'm setting up my, my Xamarin You Guest function or application.
Right. And that question, I don't know offhand. I do know that there are a lot of portal level restrictions where, like, Rob, you can log in, but I couldn't. How to do that for the tenant? I would imagine that we would lock this down because you see, I have a bunch of different tenants here. So I have my Microsoft tenant, which I can log into, and once I create a new one, I get this whole new directory here, the Xamarin You Guest. So would be my guess that the Xamarin You Guest would be then locked down, so only certain people can log into it. So if I would jump over to this Microsoft AD one, I would then be able to set who can log in and who can't.
Yeah.
So I'm not 100% sure, but I'm at that point.
I'm guessing, based on my experience working in big companies, the way that would work was you'd fill out a form and ask the actual Azure administrator to set up your application for you, and you wouldn't actually have access to even sign into the portal. That's how it usually works with big companies I've been in.
Yeah, that's probably how the red tape would work as well.
Developers just don't have access. And
Right.
then one other just really quick question. So what font are you using? Rustam really likes that font in Visual.
The font right here?
Yep.
Yes, that's called Fira Code, Firacode, and I'll put this on the GitHub page that I'll link to. Yeah, it uses ligatures to make things more readable. So yeah, like right here, the not equals to shows it like that. So yeah, that question always comes up. It's a great question.
Yeah, I use it too.
So, yep. All right. So we'll start talking about the app then. So the app, I'll bring up.
Actually, so we got one more follow up on that.
Very good.
So again, this is for Stephen's question. It's also an identity provider, correct? I assume you're talking about Azure itself. Is that what you're talking about, Stephen? So we'll see if Stephen follows up on that. Oh, okay. Actually, he was talking about Okta. So I'll follow up on that.
Okay.
All right. Good.
All right. Very good. All right. So then back to the app itself. Bring this one back up. So there's going to be a couple different pages when we log in. I'm going to want, if I've logged in before, or when I start the app up, if I logged in before, I'm not going to want to have to go back through this login process. I'm going to want this page to show up right away. And of course, there can be pages that I don't care if people are logged into or not. I just want them to see the content right away. So using this MSAL client, or what I call the MSAL client, the Microsoft.identity client, I can do all that. I can have that set up so I don't actually have to manifest and hit up that NuGet package, or not the NuGet package, but the web APIs themselves, take care of the OAuth flow, go up and hit Twitter up, all that stuff. That's all encapsulated for me. And it's all done through that NuGet package. And it's actually, I'm not going to say it's simple, but it's, once you get used to it, it becomes more straightforward. So the way I have this all done, first I added that NuGet package, and then I created a service library to do this for me. It's called, the main application, or the main object in here is called public client application. And in order to use this, there's a couple platform dependent steps that we have to do. Because as I mentioned, it does call out to the shell out to a web view. And what we have to do is set up a info.p list over on iOS. And because when it's showing out to that web view, it calls back with a URL that looks like this MSAL with the GUID. And if you remember, that MSAL with the GUID is what we set up in our application from before. Right down here. So we call it to our application. The application, or our B2C, our B2C then responds with this MSAL with that GUID there. And then when we register it with this URL types in iOS, this then tells the operating system, hey, re-invoke our application, restart it up. And then it calls it open URL is overridden. And again, this is just another Microsoft.identity client from that NuGet. It just says, hey, everything's cool. Let's keep on chugging. So it's just one step that you have to just take. It's a boilerplate step that you always have to do over on iOS. Same thing happens over on Android. It's just done through an intent filter instead of through the info.p list. Again, just setting up the scheme that's going to be called back, and then over on the main activity, on activity result, authentication continuation helper, and then set authentication continuation event args, and away you go. So those two steps are the only two steps that you have to do on the platform specific portion of each project to get you going. So I'm going to shut those down so we have a little more room. Then everything else can be done in Xamarin Forms in the shared project. As I mentioned, you have the public client application. So this one is the main communication mechanism up to B2C. I have an init here. And so what this init does is just calls out with a client ID, and that's the client ID for the application. inits it, and then has this redirect URL. And this redirect URL is that MSAL again. So it's just letting it know what to be looking for when it comes back. And then finally, there's two methods here that I want to call out. There's a get cached sign-in token and a get sign-in sign-up token. So the get cached sign-in token is something that gets called that when you just want to check the cache. So the Microsoft.identity.client, or what I'll just call the MSAL, it caches the token for us, the information that it gets back from B2C for us. So if you already logged in once, it keeps it on device until it expires. And so this acquire token silent async goes through and does that for us. It says when we call it, we just pass it which scopes we want. Again, this is that scopes being a formality in our case. We say get user by policy. And so what this is, the auth client keeps a collection of users in it. And then I'm just saying which policy I want to look for. So if I had a sign up, sign in policy and a edit policy that I've invoked, there's going to be a user for each. And so I'm just going to get the user that's assigned to that policy. And then here, at least for the acquired token silent async, these two are really not needed. If I had this last one as true, it would automatically say, all right, if I didn't find the user in the cache, let's go out, invoke the sign in, sign up authority, which happens to be the URL that's display to force a sign in, sign up. Since I have that false, it just ignores it. If it found it, I call this parse ID token. So everything comes back as base 64. So what this goes through, it takes that base 64 ID token and just decodes it for me. So once I get that decoded token, it's going to be a J object. And I'll say, hey, if it has a name in it, pull that out. If it has a city in it, pull that out. And this user info is just an object, a POCO, a POCO object that I created that I'm going to use elsewhere in the app. So this gets cache sign-in token. If it's not in there, it throws an exception. So during my startup, I go and see, hey, if it has it, if it does, great. Show my auth required view, the view that says it has the authorization only info in it. If it doesn't, show the login view. The login view has a button click that says login. It calls this get sign in up token, essentially log in, which looks like this. The pattern I'm following here is first I say get sign up, sign in. It goes back and says, all right, get my set cache token. If it has it, great, return that user. If not, it calls acquire token async. So it's not acquire token silent, it's acquire token async, where it actually goes out and says, show me a login screen. The difference here is that it's saying forced login. So it's just showing how the user or how the screen should display. And it's app UI parent. This is Android only, and it's really just passing the activity of the screen. Again, parsing the ID token and then return it to user. So if I would run this, I'm going to set a breakpoint right here. I'm on my iPhone. Another thing worth noting is that when you're debugging a lot of AD B2C stuff, is generally you're going to want to debug on device because the caching on the simulator sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. So it's just easier to debug on device. With that said, of course, I'm debugging on a simulator. So I will log in. And here I'm going to do an email address and password, but I don't have an account yet. So I'm going to do the sign up now. So I'm going to enter an email address. And I have it set up with my policy that require a validation code. So it's going to make sure I actually own that email address first. So it's going to send it and say, all right, what's your verification code? And you can see down here, that this create is grayed out. So I'm going to go over here and see if it sent it to me yet. Did I enter the right mat at codemailmat.com? That takes the fun out of the demo. There it is. And it's 231893. I enter it, I click verify code. Make sure I enter the code correctly. And it says it's good. All right, it knows that the emails are good. So I enter a password. That's my super secret one. ABCD1234 exclamation point. And then I can put down whatever display name I want. So I'll do Matthew. And the city, I'll put down Seattle. And I hit create, spins through, and now it comes back and I hit my breakpoint. And the reason I wanted to hit the breakpoint is to look at this ID token that comes back. And here we go. If I can open it up. All right. So this ID token, it's base 64. It looks like gobbledygook. Well, what I can do is that the B2C team has created this jwt.ms, and I can put it in here, and it automatically decodes it for me. So I can see what came back. I can see the claims, when it expires, and I can see that my name, Matthew, in a city, even though I'm not in Seattle, Seattle's there. And I can even go to claims here and view the information and the description of it. So if I created a custom claim, the description that I would enter would actually be in the notes as well. So that's pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to continue it on. It's going to go through. Then it went off and hit the API and brought me back this stuff. And so when it hits the API, all we have to do then is set this request.headers.authorization, sending in the bearer token and then the authorization token, which we get out of the result as well, which just is access token. So there's an ID token, which is the token that says who we are, and then an access token, which gives us access to the backend. And that's all there is to do to get at the information behind everything. But we can do more than that. If we go back into the portal, I can set up my sign up policy. I can change it. I can go through and edit it to require more information. I can say, you know what? I want to turn my multi-factor authentication on. So now it's going to require me to enter a phone number or have a phone number on file in order for me to have information or be able to log in. I can also have set up here custom pages. So I don't break the branding at all. So I can say use a custom page, and now I can say, all right, what's the URL for it? And I already have a URL in my notes section here. If I go out and view it real quickly, and so it's going to bring back this URL to show in the web page or in the login page. So I can go through to that. Paste that in there, hit OK. OK there. Make sure I save. Very good. And then I'll go back over to the Android side. I'll click sign out. So when you sign out, what all I'm doing here in my authentication service is going through all the users in the auth client and just removing them. Okay. So back over to the app, I click login, and you can see now I see my little Azure Advocate mascot. It's not just a blank page anymore. And I will do Twitter login, and it's going to ask me to verify my phone number, where I would send a code, or I could have it call me. And I believe it is this one. And then it comes back, and then we'll call it to the API and show this. So we can have the sign in, sign up. We can make it as customized as we want to do. And it is actually pretty robust. So back to the slides. Again, Azure AD B2C, it's all the benefits. Or actually, Rob, before I get into the wrap up, is there any more questions for the demo?
A couple. So if you remember at the beginning, when you were first adding that NuGet package, you had to do a little initialization for iOS. Is there anything required for UWP?
UWP, I actually don't know the answer to that. I will find out, though. That is something I'll find out, and I will make in this demo. I'll add it to the demo as well.
Okay. Do you know, is there any example how to hook up the Active Directory B2C from the Microsoft Identity Framework from a web app or web API?
From the Identity Framework, do we mean the Identity Experience Framework? Where is it? So are we talking with the Identity Framework, are we talking the Graph API, or are we talking the Experience Framework here? I guess which one?
I'm not sure. So if you can follow up on that with another some more details, I'll re-ask that question too.
All right.
Another one. Does your Twitter work as a single click because you have been logged into Twitter in the browser of the simulator?
Sure. What happens is as soon as you're logged in with the, because it's going out and doing you're out to a web view at that point. If you're logged in already with your device, it's already checked. It already knows that through Twitter because you're cached in. So if you logged in with Twitter before with a totally different app or with Twitter itself, it already knows that you're logged in. So it is, just a single click. However, if you had not logged in with Twitter ever before, you would have to go through the login process. So on my Android device, which was a real device, I was logged in before.
Great. Let's say another one. Wasn't this MFA from Twitter and not from your code?
No, that MFA was from my code. The Twitter code would be different. You would still see, let me bring that back up. I'll hit sign out here. So if I would do, actually, let me go this way. I'll actually show that. If I log in here, so I'm going to log in with the username and password. It's going to go through, and I'm going to get prompted to enter my phone number so it can do MFA here. So this MFA is coming from loginmicrosoftonline.com, not Twitter. Now, if I was logging in with Twitter for the first time ever on my device, I would get hit up for MFA with Microsoft, B2C, and from Twitter had I had that enabled. And so a good way you can check to see if it is coming from Twitter, at least so you would know, is when you hit Twitter, right here you can see it's the Twitter screen that's logging you in real quick. You see the Twitter information. So here we can see this isn't Twitter anymore. It's coming from login.microsoft.com at that point.
Great. So I just was looking at the Microsoft Identity Client GitHub repository, and it does not look like there's anything required for UWP, as far as I can tell.
Okay.
Let's see. look at other questions here. Could I use all these features from my own API that I wrote? I mean, manage users, manage their roles, refresh access tokens, etc. Or where could we read more about that?
I do have links already in the GitHub repo, which I linked to right at the very end. So yes, the quick answer, if I'm understanding the question, is yes, you can definitely do that. The API. So is the API already a identity providing framework? Actually, I think you could go ahead and do that already if I'm thinking as I think through this. So.
Sorry, you say you're still thinking about that?
No. I think that I think definitely that you can, because I do kind of have a miniature authentication framework here already with the auth service. It's real simple. But as you combine this with the Microsoft Graph APIs, you would just create essentially a wrapper around those to provide for your own framework.
Gotcha. Let's see. So back to that question, is there an example how do you hook up the B2C from the MS identity framework from a web app or web API? Follow up is that from Microsoft.asp.net.identity is the follow up to that. So let's say you have a web API or an MVC app on the server, and you want to hook in to the Azure B2C.
Okay.
So I've looked a little bit about this. I'm pretty sure there are samples out there of how to do that on the GitHub repository, but if you want to answer that too, you can.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, you can, and I will have links in the GitHub repo of how so you can go directly to that and see. But yes, you can definitely do that.
Great. All right. Let's see. I think that's all the questions there.
All right. So we'll wrap it up here. B2C gives you the benefits of Azure Active Directory with all the users, and that you can still have what I'll call the pre-known users, your employees in a corporate setting, but you also can have users create their own accounts as well. And the features of B2C is that you get social authentication. You can have people log in with Twitter or Facebook or GitHub. You have multi-factor authentication where it's going to come through in a text message. You can have the users, if they're using local auth, where they have their email address, password, they can have them change their password. And even if they didn't use local auth, you still can have them change their profile of the B2C app. We can customize the look and feel of the login pages. And you can add custom attributes to the Active Directory. And you can collect those custom attributes through the login pages as well. There is a ton of confusing terminology that goes along with this. Claims and identity providers and scope. Docs.microsoft.com does a decent job of, and they're getting better, of explaining all of this. I have a series of blog posts, there's 9 and counting, that actually goes through all these in depth as well. All of this will be at the show notes, I'll call them, on the GitHub page, so you can go through them and really get down into the nitty-gritty details of them as well. And so when we're developing mobile apps, the first thing you want to do is configure the portal, and second, use the MSAL, or the Microsoft.Identity client, to go in and get at everything. And so thank you very much. That aka.ms link will bring you over to the GitHub portal, which has the demo app in it. It'll have links to all the articles I was mentioning. And thank you everybody very much for tuning in.
Great. So we have actually one more question, which is actually a pretty important question. We left it towards the end here. Are there any plans to not be dependent on the web view to do authentication to various providers? So when we're talking mobile, it's really important that we use the web view. If you want to talk about why that is.
Yeah, I have a big smile on my face, Rob. Big smile on my face right now. So the OAuth standard dictates that you have to use web views to do this authentication. because then you can guarantee that nobody's getting in the middle of you going out to, say, Twitter and coming back. However, I know the team is aware of this as being a blocker, so to speak, because really, mobile developers, we don't want to have spend so much time crafting our app, we don't want to give up control. So that's on their list of things to at least take a look at. I'm not sure where on the priority list it's falling. So that's something I am advocating for, is saying that we do need to have this all within our apps. So it's something that I'm definitely going back to them and saying, knocking on the door, so to speak. So it's on their radar. So yeah, but it does go against the OAuth standard. So it's a back and forth there.
Yeah, definitely important. Like you said, you don't want necessarily just a username and password field in your app, because then you could be logging that, you could be saving it, seeing what people's passwords are. So that's the reason that Apple and Google are definitely they want the web views, so you can't do that. All right. So if anybody else has any other questions for Matt, please let us know. We'd love to answer any more. We will have this recorded video up in a few days up on our Xamarin University site, so you can come back, watch it, learn even more the second time you go through it. And we'll also have that link there. You can see that, where you can go download the materials and things like that. So we have another guest lecture coming up soon, so go register for that one. We'd love to see you back here. Matt, thank you so much for your time and teaching us all this about authentication. Really helpful.
Thank you, Rob.
All right. Thanks, everyone.